Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. Close to 2 million refugees have now escaped Ukraine as the war between Ukraine and Russia rages on. Foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari weighs in on why the U.S. should focus on bringing in more energy from Canada and not Russia. And the Briar continues at the NMAX Centre in Lethbridge. BCN's Micah Quinn has an update as to how well Team Alberta is doing.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Russian forces continue to pound Ukrainian cities with rockets, even after announcing another limited ceasefire and safe corridors to allow civilians to flee some besieged cities. So far, more than 1.7 million refugees have escaped Ukraine, many fleeing to neighboring Poland. The battle for Mariupol continues and is crucial because if it falls, Moscow could establish a land corridor to Crimea, which Russia seized from Ukraine in 2014. The two sides are meeting for a third round of talks, but there's little hope for a breakthrough. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is assuring Lithuania and Latvia of NATO protection and American support. Blinken made quick visits to two of the three Baltic states, increasingly on edge as Russia's invasion of Ukraine moves forward.
Over the past 30 years, the Baltics have formed a democratic wall that is now standing against the tide of autocracy that Moscow is seeking to push further into Europe. And my message on behalf of the United States to the people of Latvia, to all of the Baltics, is that the United States is more committed than ever to standing with you as our democracies rise to the challenge of this moment. Latvia and the United States, together with our allies and partners, will continue to stand with Ukraine. We're surging our security assistance to strengthen Ukraine's capacity to defend itself. We're increasing humanitarian aid to the Ukrainian people, both those still inside Ukraine and those who have had to flee.
Now, as the U.S. looks at implementing more sanctions against Russia, including the potential of no longer importing Russian oil and gas, that could be good news for Canada. Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari says the Biden administration should focus on bringing in energy from allies and not from countries like Russia and Iran.
And why not be energy independent here in the West when it comes to working with our neighbor in Canada, when we can rely on our own energy assets, when we can lease out our own energy fields, and then relying on our enemy not only for oil but for refinement and everything else. I mean, it's a crazy equation to say we have the ability, but we are still going to rely on and support our enemies when it comes to bringing in oil and gas.
Lisa Daftari will have the latest from the Ukrainian-Russian war coming up in the second half of our program. Now, some in Canada say it would be helpful to Ukraine and the European Union if Canada were to change its view on fossil fuels and allow for greater exports of liquid natural gas across the Atlantic to make it harder for Putin to fund his war. Lethbridge MP Rachel Thomas agrees, saying this could certainly help keep a bully at bay.
Putin is able to invade Ukraine because his war machine is largely propped up by the funds received from the sale of oil and gas. If Eastern Europe doesn't have to be reliant on Russia, if they can be reliant on Canada instead for the natural gas consumption, we can actually take that money from the coffers of Russia then. In doing so, we create greater stability in the region because, of course, those Eastern European nations are no longer dependent, on the bullying, the bully in the neighborhood, I should say.
Make sure you catch the full interview with MP Rachel Thomas and BCN's Jeanette Rocher coming up after business news. Ukraine has asked the International Court of Justice to order Russia to immediately suspend its military operations. It says Moscow is already committing widespread war crimes and must be stopped. Russia snubbed a hearing in The Hague, and the court's president says the judges will soon issue a decision as soon as possible. But military law experts say even if the court issues an order for Russia to halt the fighting, the chance of that happening is zero. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, British PM Boris Johnson, and Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte held a joint news conference following their meeting in London. In his remarks, PM Trudeau announced sanctions on a further 10 individuals with ties to Russian President Vladimir Putin, from a list compiled of jailed opposition leader Alexei Navalny. Canadian sanctions have already targeted hundreds of senior Russian government officials and supporters of Russian leadership. Trudeau says the fighting spirit of the Ukrainian people is inspiring.
The courage of Ukrainians in standing up to the Russian invaders has inspired and humbled us all. And we need to show ourselves as determined to push back against Putin, against the Kremlin, as hard as we can and as effectively as we can. And that's where, from the beginning, Boris and I and a couple of others were pushing so hard on SWIFT, on the central banks, on the Russian central bank, including going after their ability to draw on their reserves, something that even a week ago we didn't think would be in the cards, and yet seeing just how strongly democracies around the world have stood and responded, I think is a surprise to Putin, perhaps a little bit of a surprise to all of us as well, that we actually can stand and push back really hard for the principles that drive us.
Trudeau is in Europe until March 11th to meet with many world leaders. His meetings with European leaders will focus on the global response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. In the face of war and the tragedies taking place in Ukraine, a Ukrainian couple who have been together for 22 years and have an 18-year-old daughter decided to formalize their relationship on Sunday by getting married on the defense line in Ukraine. The blushing bride left her job when the war began and joined the military defending her district and the outskirts of Kyiv. Until the ceremony, she had not seen her partner since the beginning of the war.
Звичайно, я щаслива перш за все, тому що ми живі, цей день почався, мій чоловік живий, він зі мною, і ми вирішили, так порадилися і вирішили, що раптом що буде завтра, і ми хочемо скріпити наш шлюб перед державою і перед Богом. Так, у нас є доросла донька, і я думаю, що вона щаслива з цього нашого кроку.
That's so nice to see. Well, it was nice to see some of the flurries earlier today in the forecast. Jeanette Rocher is here now with a quick peek at the weather forecast. Jeanette, we may see even more flurry activity tonight?
Yeah, well, I would say don't put your winter tires away just yet because we are expecting more flurry action this evening. We could see 2 to 4 centimeters overnight and then another 30% chance of flurries tomorrow on Tuesday. Temperatures also dropping into the minus double digits, particularly overnight. Into tomorrow, Tuesday, we're looking at a high of -8. Going to see some wind gusts up to 40 kilometers per hour as well. Later on in the week, we could see more flurries as well. So I will have those details coming up for you later on in the newscast.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeanette. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation is applauding the Kenney government, which will be removing the provincial fuel tax beginning April 1st. That means a savings of 13 cents a litre for Albertans each time they fill up. Kevin Lacey is the Alberta director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, and he joins us now from Edmonton. So, Kevin, how much will this save Albertans? Let's say I have a vehicle with a 70-litre tank.
Well, look, and the 70 liters is like an average sedan that someone will drive, and this will save about $9.50 on every fill up. That's a big number. When you look at gas taxes on the average price of fuel, it makes up a sizable portion of that pump price. So about 41 cents a liter currently is just taxes you pay to the federal and provincial government. There's a federal gas tax, provincial gas tax, the GST, and the carbon tax. It's kind of like a Dr. Seuss of taxes that are on top of fuel. And it makes up about 25% of the price. So this is a significant reduction in the amount of taxes you'll pay, and was the right approach given that you're paying more for groceries, transportation, and everything else you need as a result of higher inflation that's going on.
Thanks so much for your time today. That was Kevin Lacey, Alberta Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, joining us from Edmonton. By the way, the province also announced that beginning April 1st, Albertans can also expect a $150 rebate on their electricity bills. Alberta NDP leader Rachel Notley has been diagnosed with COVID-19. Notley, who is triple vaccinated, said in a Facebook post that she tested positive on Sunday using a rapid antigen test. She says her symptoms are mild and she'll work from home while in isolation. The opposition leader says she will return to the legislature when it is safe to do so. Hundreds of people were at City Hall in Calgary on Sunday showing their support for Ukraine. The rally was organized by the local branch of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress. Calgary President Anna Platonova says there are more than 90,000 people in the Stampede City who are of Ukrainian heritage. Platonova urged Calgarians to donate to the Canada-Ukraine Foundation's humanitarian program, which is raising money to deliver food, medicine, and shelter to people who are still in the country. She said the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress is also creating a list of people who are willing to open their homes to refugees fleeing the violence. A petition has been launched to see changes made as to how and when the Emergencies Act can be invoked. The petition, launched by former Liberal MP Dan McTagg and supported by Lethbridge MP Rachel Thomas, want to see 2/3 support and not just a vote of 50 plus 1% in order for the Emergencies Act to be invoked. So far, over 1,700 Canadians have signed the petition. The 2022 Tim Hortons Brier continued at the NMAX Centre here in Lethbridge. As of Monday afternoon, Team Alberta is undefeated at the Brier. As Micah Quinn explains now, the Kevin Cooey foursome won their 4th game in a row.
Competition's tough. You got to play great. I probably need a few breaks along the way too. That would definitely help.
Kevin Cooey and Team Alberta pulled out a 9-3 win against Team Yukon on Monday morning. This win catapults the team to a 4-0 record so far in the 2022 Tim Hortons Brier. As of Monday morning, Kevin Cooey and Team Alberta have joined the wildcard number 1 and 2 teams, Team Canada and Nova Scotia, as the only undefeated team so far in the tournament.
With the format the way it is, you can't take teams lightly. You know, one bad loss here could really sink you down the road. So it's a big event, biggest event of the year. I guess the trials were a big event too, but that's in our past. So we're focused on this week, and you know, we want to win.
Cooey has history with the NMAX Centre when he played with Team Canada during the 2019 World Men's Curling Championships. Cooey and his team came up short 7-2 in the final against Team Sweden. Cooey says the crowds during the Brier have been great.
Obviously, lots of fan support from home and all Alberta and everywhere else. So I don't think we'd ask to be playing anywhere else. We love playing here.
The 2022 Tim Hortons Brier will run at the NMAX Centre until March 13th. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Owners of the Last Chance Cat Ranch in Lethbridge are speaking out after they were ordered by the city to shut down or find a new location. This comes as a neighbor brought forward multiple complaints and issues with the ranch. As BCN's Angela Stewart explains now, the group has until next February to vacate their current location.
None of us can imagine that actually coming to fruition. If it does, well, shame on the city, quite frankly.
It's now a plea for help and donations as the Last Chance Cat Ranch has been told that they must shut down or move out.
And with that, they issued a stop order, and we have 1 year to vacate.
During a safety standing committee last May, a neighbor of the ranch had filed a submission stating some of the concerns they had with the facility, saying, quote, "No one lives in the house and no one could live in the house in its current condition. And in the backyard, they have gone as far as to fill up the entire backyard with these catios and fill it with these tarps. It's an absolute eyesore." During the meeting, the neighbor said that they had tried to reason with the ranch, but
He says all these things that he's wanting to work with us and we shut him down. Not true. He's entirely unreasonable and basically has said that he just wants us gone.
Lori Almstead with the ranch tells me they were not in violation of anything at the time of the committee meeting and the matter was dropped.
Since then, quite clearly, there has been a further push to address us in whatever fashion, and now we are considered against land use bylaw.
On top of that, the city has issued additional stop orders.
The first being a limit of 2 volunteers per day to tend to the animals in that facility, which is it just can't be done.
The second stop order issued, food delivery to the ranch can only happen once a week. Bridge City News reached out to the city for a comment and received a statement reading, "When the city issues a stop order, there's an operational process that's followed by city staff. To be fair to all parties, there is also a clearly defined appeal process through the Subdivision and Development Appeal Board." Olmstead says they plan to appeal the stop orders, but as of right now, the ranch will have to close its doors by February 17th, 2023. For Bridge City News, I'm Angela Stewart.
A Lethbridge man has been charged in connection with stabbings outside of a city nightclub over the weekend. Police responded to a call at 2 a.m. Sunday morning following an altercation outside of Club Lime on 1st Avenue South. A 26-year-old man from Fort Macleod suffered multiple stab wounds, and a 20-year-old Lethbridge man, along with a suspect, were also stabbed. 23-year-old John Gondarak Couturiel of Lethbridge faces multiple charges, including aggravated assault. He was released on bail and will be back in court on April the 1st. The new Deputy Chief of the Lethbridge Police Service has officially been sworn in. Gerald Grobmeyer joins the LPS with over 20 years of experience with the RCMP, where he led a team of over 100 officers and 86 municipal employees. Grobmeyer began working in the police force in 1993 and was elected in November of last year following a national search run by the LPS. Chief Shaheen Medizadeh says he and Grobmeyer previously worked together, and that will help during his transition. A resolution between the University of Lethbridge's Board of Governors and its Faculty Association could still be at least 2 weeks away. Enhanced mediation has been delayed by an entire week due to the availability of mediator David Jones. Mediation will then take 3 to 4 days. Then a written report could take up to another 4 days. Meanwhile, students have not been able to attend classes. But according to Faculty Association President Dan O'Donnell, the move to mediation is potentially good. He says it will get both sides talking again for the first time in a month. O'Donnell says, however, it won't necessarily produce a concrete resolution.
Waiting a week is really, I think, a very poor decision. And the reason why is it means that we'll be in week 5, almost week 6 of this strike. And again, either side can vote no. This is known as enhanced mediation just because the mediator has instructions. First of all, the mediator must write a report, either saying, the parties agree, or that will say the parties were unable to agree. This is how that could be solved. And I recommend that both sides vote on this. And so, if the parties are unable to agree, the mediator actually basically says, this is how you should agree.
The U of L Faculty Association has been on strike since February the 10th. Scammers are all around us, and the Better Business Bureau of Southern Alberta has released a report to help protect Canadians. The Scam Tracker Canadian Risk Report highlights the top 10 scams you should watch out for. Staff say cryptocurrency is currently the riskiest scam in our country. March is also Fraud Prevention Month, and the Better Business Bureau is continuing to encourage you to stay updated on current scams. Wes LaFortune from the BBB says they recently received a report from a victim who says they're at risk of losing more than $800,000 from a romance scam.
Anytime you're online, and especially dating sites, be very careful and really, as soon as somebody asks you for money, banking information, credit card information, end the contact. Do not have any more contact with that person. That's a scammer. That's organized crime. The criminals are very good at engaging people emotionally. These are people that are looking for companionship, looking for love online. And they get drawn into these scenarios, and all of a sudden they're giving this person lots of money that often they can't afford.
LaFortune says to reach out to the non-emergency police line if you've fallen prey to one of these fraudsters. Well, we received some light showers and flurries in parts of southwestern Alberta today, and that trend will continue in the short term. Complete weather details are coming up. Well, some areas of southwestern Alberta saw light flurries, and we were slightly below average for this time of year for the high. Jeanette Rocher is in now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, cooler temperatures and more snow may be on the way for our city.
Yeah, Hal, it does look like Old Man Winter could be hanging around, at least for tonight and into tomorrow. We are looking at another 2 to 4 centimeters this evening, -10 the overnight low. Into tomorrow, we are seeing the possibility of some more flurries, about 60%. -8 the high tomorrow, -11 in Lethbridge on Wednesday. That's pretty much the coldest we've had in a while. -7 on a Thursday. Could see a possibility of some flurries then as well. Up to 5 degrees on Friday and all the way up to 10 degrees. There's that double digit there. Mainly cloudy skies on Saturday. Sunday could see a possibility of some snow as well. So winter not quite over yet. I would say average high for this time of year, 4 degrees. -8 the average low. 18 was where we were at back in 2005, and in 1951 we were sitting at a freezing -34. 7:02 is when the sun rose this morning. Our sunset this evening at 6:23 p.m. So days getting longer and longer. That is an indication of summer. If it doesn't look like it outside, just look at the time the sun is out. It's lovely. 9 degrees the high on the coast tomorrow, 40% chance of showers in both Victoria and Vancouver, high of 8 degrees in Vancouver, 60% chance of flurries in both Edmonton and Calgary tomorrow. Edmonton sitting at -8 tomorrow, -9 the high for Calgary. Gusty winds up to about 40 km/h in Calgary tomorrow. Saskatoon looking at some snow as well, -10, -11 the high in Regina with periods of light snow up to 60 winds in Regina. Same thing for Winnipeg, looking at wind gusts up to 60 km/h, a high of -6. Toronto, no snow there, but a mix of sun and cloud, high of 4 degrees, 2 degrees the high in Ottawa tomorrow, also partly cloudy skies. And in Montreal, a high of 0 degrees. So not so bad for the central part of the country, not as much precipitation happening there. Not so much for the East Coast, though. Lots of precipitation happening there. We're looking at mix of flurries and rain for Fredericton, Halifax, Charlottetown. Highs of 0 in Fredericton, 6 the high in Halifax, 2 the high in Charlottetown, 7 degrees the high in St. John's, Newfoundland. Looking at risk of freezing rain there as well. Lots of rain tomorrow, up to 25 millimeters, and snow as well, up to 80 km/h winds. So lots happening in St. John's tomorrow. So there you have it. That is your weather forecast.
MasterCard, Visa, and American Express have all announced that they're suspending operations in Russia. That is the latest blow to the country's financial system in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. MasterCard said cards issued by Russian banks will no longer be supported by its network, and any card issued outside of the country will not work at Russian stores or ATMs. Visa, meanwhile, says it will be working with clients and partners in Russia to cease all Visa transactions over the coming days. The Russian central bank says it has a plan B, which involves a Chinese card operating system. Despite soaring cost overruns, Indigenous-led groups are committed to buying the Trans Mountain pipeline. The estimated construction cost of expanding the line has risen from $12.6 to $21.4 billion. With previously signed contracts, only 20 to 25% of the increased costs can be passed on to oil companies, which will shrink the total available profits. Nasika Services, which is working with Indigenous communities to acquire a stake in Trans Mountain, is urging Ottawa to begin negotiations. Cargojet says it had a fourth quarter profit of $102 million. That compares with a loss of $20.5 million from a year ago. It says revenue surged 26% to just under $236 million due to increased demand for its domestic, charter, and other aircraft services. That beat analyst expectations of $211.9 million. The Ontario-based provider of time-sensitive air cargo services says it is earning $167.4 million for the full year. That compares with a loss of $87.8 million in 2020. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The markets continue to react to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The TSX was down 98 points on the day to 21,304. The Dow was down 797 points to 32,817. The S&P 500 was down 127 on the day to 4201, and the Nasdaq was down 482 points to 12,830. West Texas Intermediate oil was up $3.72 on the day to $119.40 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 18 cents to $4.83 US. Gold was down 27 cents to $19.9785 US an ounce. And silver was even on the day at $25.66 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $14.01 per bushel. Barley's at $9.78. Canola's at $24.65. And corn is at $11.84 per bushel. Live cattle were up $2.13 to $137.90. Feeder cattle were up $1.48 to $154.60, and lean hogs were down 18 cents to $100.28. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to 78.04 US. Recapping one of our top stories, Russian forces continue to pound Ukraine's cities with rockets after announcing another limited ceasefire and safe corridors to allow civilians to flee some besieged cities. So far, more than 1.7 million refugees have escaped Ukraine, many fleeing to neighboring Poland. The battle for Mariupol continues and is crucial because if it falls, Moscow could establish a land corridor to Crimea, which Russia seized from Ukraine in 2014. The two sides are meeting for a third round of talks, but there's little hope for a breakthrough. The Russian military is apparently bringing in Syrian fighters to help in its invasion of Ukraine. Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari will have details for us in just a moment. There have been thousands of civilian casualties and more than 1.7 million people have now fled Ukraine due to the war with Russia. To discuss this in more detail is our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari, joining us once again from Los Angeles. Lisa, Ukrainian President Zelensky says God will not forgive Russia as the shelling increases throughout Ukraine. Is there any end in sight to this war?
Doesn't look that way, Helen, very unfortunately. And the reason why is because Putin doesn't lose a battle. He doesn't lose a war. And it's not going the way he wanted. So he will have to carry this forward. Now, did he want this to escalate to where it has? I don't believe that's true. He didn't want this many casualties. He didn't want it to drag out. He actually thought this was a slam dunk. He thought this would be a very easy operation, that he would go in and the Ukrainians would be so vulnerable to Russian forces that it would be a very quick operation, and it hasn't been. And that's because of the resistance, and that's because of the lack of experience in the Russian military, that he didn't send in his best guys. He thought this was going to be so easy that he sent in his second or third tier guys. And again, hoping that this would be such a quick turnaround that he would not have to expend the resources or his best resources. And for that reason, it continues, and the number of refugees is escalating, and the number of attacks and the number of cities that are being sieged and the property damage. It's just horrendous. And I'm sure we've all seen the footage coming out. And if there's one positive thing of being in modern times and in warfare, there should be no war. But when there is war, at least we have social media and we have citizen journalists that are keeping us abreast of what's going on. We're looking at the footage of families hiding in basements. I've been able to interview some of these families who are trying to just get out. All they need is a train or bus ticket to the border to get themselves out. And a lot of them are getting themselves to other parts of Europe. And it's just horrific. So we don't know when this will end. And I know for one thing that both sides do want it to end. Now, it's a matter of on whose terms it will come to an end.
You know, when it comes to warfare, I can understand if one country invades another to attack military installations. But why go after hospitals and apartment complexes with civilians? Is this to break the will of the Ukrainian people? What's going on here?
Yeah, well, it has done that, right? It has had that effect. Now, was this by design? I don't believe so. Again, I do believe that Vladimir Putin is a very calculated statesman. He is not this lunatic that people are describing him as. I think that is an incorrect way of depicting him, and it really dismisses or just takes away, distracts from the main story that he came in with a plan. He came in with a strategy, and it's not for it wasn't just randomly that he was aligning over 100,000 of his soldiers on the border for such a long time to wait for that opportune moment to go in. Now, why he is hitting civilian areas, again, I think that this has gone very rogue. I think that this is not part of what the initial plan was, that it was going to be very targeted. But look, he is being met with a resistance that they did not calculate into their main equation. And for that reason, they will hit and try to go wherever they need to go. The Ukrainians are not as experienced. They don't have as much of the military might by any means. They don't have the equipment. They don't have the technology, but they know the way of the land, and they know where to hide, where to come up on them. And if this is guerrilla war tactics, then they are doing a great job at keeping the Russians back. But for that reason, the Russians on the ground there are escalating. And they're not just Russians, they're Chechens. And now we have reports that Russia is also recruiting Syrians to go fight. And the Syrians are, think about it, the Basiji fighters from Iran. They are, Palestinian fighters from Gaza. They're all sorts of, street rats that are going to go fight there. And they're not going to play by the rules. They're going to do whatever it takes to get ahead, particularly with all the setbacks that they're meeting on the ground there.
You know, there are reports that Ukrainian President Zelensky has been giving out weapons quite freely to whomever is willing to fight the Russians during the invasion. Apparently, some of those rifles, Lisa, have made their way into the hands of criminals who are allegedly now using those weapons on Ukrainians to rob them.
Right. I think, this is something that is expected. It's expected for many reasons. First of all, not all guys are good guys on the ground there. We have obviously the reports that are beautiful. You have old men and young children rolling up their sleeves to say, we want to fight in this war. We have women who are part of the fight. We have families that are part of the fight who say, we're not going to run out of here and escape and cower down. We're going to actually stand our ground. We're going to roll up our sleeves and we're going to fight for our country, and showing a tremendous amount of patriotism. On the other hand, you have people that will always take advantage when they see an opportunity, and this is an opportunity. The same thing goes for when people want to give charity. Here in the West, we look at all these different websites. We don't. A lot of people have been emailing me. Are these vetted? How can we trust people? There will always be people who take advantage. They will try to take the money. They will try to take the weapons. And in this case, there is no time to vet who's getting a weapon. If you have somebody who's saying, "I'm going to roll up my sleeves and take a weapon in hand," you're going to give him a weapon and hope that he fights for his country and not hold that weapon against another fellow Ukrainian to get his wallet or his watch or whatever else they want to rob him for. But again, par for the course. These are the unfortunate side effects and the consequences to being in a war and having to, scrape together some sort of resistance, for his country. So I think the Ukrainian president is in a very tight bond, and he has no other way of going about this. But I think they're doing a great job of really holding their ground, and we pray for them. It's horrific what's going on.
The United States and European allies are exploring banning imports of Russian oil. That's according to U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Now, Europe relies on Russia for crude oil and natural gas, Lisa, but has also become more open to banning more Russian products.
Well, that's what it's going to take, right? I think the crazy thing is that we've waited this long to do that. Shut it off. We have to shut them off. And that's the only way. Look, the sanctions didn't matter. I mean, what is the connection between, sanctioning some rich Russian guy with a yacht in the middle of the sea, and then bringing in 670,000 barrels of oil daily? We're purchasing in the United States from Russia. So there has to be some sort of consequence that will really affect the Russians, really hit them in the pocket, and it's going to come down to energy because that's what we rely on them. In the same breath, we are pledging $10 million, another Ukrainian aid bill that is floating around among lawmakers this week to allow the Ukrainians to take matters into their own hands. But again, you have to connect the dots. There has to be a big plan here, and it will include both choking the Russians at home, stopping to buy, making ourselves energy independent, at least to the level that we don't rely on buying 670,000 barrels from them daily, and being able to give the Ukrainians assets so that they can, keep up this resistance. That's what it's going to take. And unfortunately, we've gotten to a place where we didn't want it to escalate to the point it has. We do not want to get involved militarily. We do not want this to escalate to World War III, as many people are saying. That's what it's going to take. That's the recipe for stopping all of this.
Has there been any talk by the Biden administration to potentially revisit Keystone XL? We've got the oil here. You don't have to buy Russian oil, Lisa, in the United States. We can help you as Canadians.
Right. Great question, Hal. And you know what? This is a very touchy subject and a very partisan subject here in the United States. If you remember, Joe Biden, the candidate, actually lost a lot of votes on this because he was not for the Keystone pipeline. A lot of families are affected, a lot of businesses are affected, a lot of states are affected. And why not be energy independent here in the West when it comes to working with our neighbor in Canada, when we can rely on our own energy assets, when we can lease out our own energy fields, and then relying on our enemy not only for oil but for refinement and everything else. I mean, it's a crazy equation to say we have the ability, but we are still going to rely on and support our enemies when it comes to bringing in oil and gas. So I think it's something that hasn't been touched yet. And this administration in particular, if you listen to the State of the Union, President Biden wants to make this Russia-Ukraine issue look like a bipartisan issue where everybody is united, and we're going to show them. But let me tell you one other thing, Hal. It's not being reported widely in the mainstream media, but we're covering it it on the foreign desk where we are asking Russia to help us broker the deal with the Iranian regime. And for that reason, over the weekend, there was talk of limiting sanctions on Russia in order to kind of give them a little breathing space, in order for them to help us broker this deal with the Iranian regime. You can't make this stuff up, right? It's like a bad movie. In order for them to push forward this deal with the Iranian regime. Now, why would we want to not only remove sanctions from Russia, but remove sanctions from the world's worst terrorists and give them billions of dollars to go back on their terrorist sprees? Now, tell me why we're doing this here in the United States. So to answer your question, not only are we not using our own assets, we are helping others build up their assets. And we're talking about rogue nations like China, like North Korea, like the Iranian regime, and of course, Russia. So, I mean, that's, our state of affairs here in the United States in 2 minutes, but it's horrific what's happening. And I think we need to focus on our country, on our neighbors, and really fortifying the relationships we have with Canada and Mexico, and being energy independent here in the West.
Amen to that. Now, Lisa, the Biden administration says it is also looking at ways that it can help facilitate the supply of fighter jets to Ukraine. Tell me more about that, and do we know how many?
Yeah, this is an interesting deal that they've come up with. So Secretary of State Blinken went on all the Sunday shows to say, we are giving the green light to NATO nations to give jets to Ukraine. Now, the specific goal that has been actually flown around a lot is for Poland to give the fighter jets that they have. Now, these are Soviet era old Russian jets. They have an arsenal and they don't want to give up this arsenal of jets. But the deal was, well, if you give them to Ukraine, the United States will give you new ones. And now Poland is liking this idea, although there's opposition to this as well, and says, we're not trusting this deal. We don't want to give up our arsenal. But the deal would be for them to, and as you know, we have sent about 11,000 or so troops from the United States over to be stationed in Poland to await if there should be an escalation where the United States needs to send in, military assets into Ukraine to fight Russia. And there's already about 4,000 or 5,000 there. So we have about 16,000 troops already there. And now if we would give Poland these fighter jets, they would be able to pass along those to Ukraine. So this is a very important military alliance that we have with Poland right now to help us. They are our stop or our headquarters there close to this conflict. And of course, if they're willing to give up their jets, they're going to get an upgrade and get new jets in their arsenal. So we shall see. This is probably going to be about 24 jets. And Ukraine already has about 20. So it will be hopefully doubling their arsenal of jets and hopefully giving them that aerial advantage that they're looking for in this fight.
That's interesting that you say all of the thousands of troops, American troops that are stationed in Poland, waiting for things to escalate. I mean, what are they waiting for? There's a war going on right now in Ukraine, and the help is desperately needed. Why not send in the troops now?
Hal, it's a great question. And if we believe that the Russians would back down, then that would be something to risk. But when we think that, by sending in troops, it will absolutely escalate this to a place that we don't want it to. We know that Russia has already threatened the nuclear options on the table. We know that they have chemical weapons. We know that they will do whatever it takes. Now, should Russia, attack us, whether it's cyber or military first, then it would invoke NATO's Article 5, which would mean that an attack towards the United States would mean an attack towards NATO nations, and therefore the entire alliance would have to get involved. Again, this is all too complicated and too escalated for what Russia was hoping to accomplish. It is not in Putin's interest to launch a major, large-scale state-endorsed cyber attack or military attack towards any NATO nation and escalate this to a place where they don't want it to. So I think that for now, we will stand back, we'll provide the assets to Ukraine and hope that they can, hold the Russian military back as long as they can. And through sanctions, through energy independence, through choking the Russians in the way that we can, hopefully it will deter Putin from going any further.
Now, Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett spoke with both Russian President Putin and Ukrainian President Zelensky about a potential ceasefire. Lisa, they had one already, but it was very short-lived.
Yes, there have been ceasefires that are not, they're not listening to anything. Vladimir Putin's pushing through. And he's not interested in a ceasefire. He's interested in results. He's interested in the bottom line here. And I actually, during the last ceasefire, during the time that they were meeting on the border to discuss the ceasefire, there's shelling going on. So it just gives you a perspective as to why this won't calm down, why this won't die down anytime soon. And for that reason, we want to keep it, again, to your previous question. That's why we want to keep it as a very targeted, isolated conflict, and not escalate this to a place where it is much more large scale, many more casualties. And of course, we know that even one casualty in this war has been too much because of the nature of, this is the year 2022, and you're having, tanks roll into your city, and in modern urban areas where there are, a very high population, high density population, and you want this to de-escalate as soon as possible. The goal is to get the Russians at the table, see what their bottom line is, and try to negotiate something sooner rather than later.
Now, we only have a couple of short minutes left here, Lisa. I wanted to chat with you about the People's Convoy, which has made its way to Washington from California, where you are. We have the Freedom Convoy here in Canada, which camped out in Ottawa for a number of weeks. Tell me more about this People's Convoy.
Yeah, talk about being eclipsed by the news cycle. A lot of people were looking towards this convoy as the message that was needed here in the United States, echoing the message that their brothers, the truckers in Canada, were able to do somewhat effectively, I think, in terms of getting the message across that truckers have this ability to demonstrate through the optics of lining their trucks up across Canada, and now it's going to be across the United States, to show that they are against mandates. This is also coinciding with the dropping of mandates. All of a sudden, overnight, if you saw it at the State of the Union, we had no masks on. Schools are dropping their mask mandates, and hopefully soon dropping their vaccine mandates for children. So I think that it's a bit anticlimactic, unfortunately, but they were able to stop traffic and get into the DC Beltway a bit, which I'm glad for that, because they got at least some satisfaction of seeing their hard work and all of this planning come to some sort of climax in Washington. But it's what's really important is that these mandates are dropped and people get their freedom and liberty back, whether they're truckers or teachers or students or anyone else across the spectrum. We're hoping for peace, security, and liberty across the map, whether it's in Ukraine, the people of Russia, and of course here in Canada and the United States. So our message is the same across the board.
American correspondent, one of our regular contributors, Lisa Daftari, thanks again for joining us from Los Angeles.
My pleasure.
Well, these are crazy times that we're living in, a COVID pandemic with varying restrictions and mandates, freedom, protests, and now a war in the Ukraine with potential to escalate beyond those borders. Joining us to discuss this is Rachel Thomas. She is the MP for Lethbridge, Alberta. Rachel, thanks for joining us once again today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So, Rachel, all eyes are now on the Ukraine, where they're defending themselves against what most of the world views as an unprovoked military invasion by Russia. So what is Ukraine asking Canada to do to help?
Yeah, I think really, to summarize that, I would say really Ukraine is saying, we want fewer words and more action. They want to know that Canada is standing in full solidarity with the people of Ukraine. And that means coming through with some support. And certainly we've done that to some extent, but I think that there are more things that Canada can and should do in order to stand with the Ukrainian people.
Okay, so with that said, what has Canada done so far to help, and what more can and should be done by our nation to aid Ukraine?
Yeah, for sure. So, it's certainly a number of things that have been done so far in order to assist in this situation. I think it can be broken down into two streams. So one is to help the Ukrainian people, and then the other stream would be, what has Canada done in order to take action against Russia and, of course, Belarus, because they've shown great support for Putin as well. So I think on the side of looking at things that have been done in order to assist Ukraine. We can talk about things like lethal and non-lethal military support that has been given. We can talk about financial support that has been given in order to aid, humanitarian efforts. A loan was given for $620 million in order to support, Ukraine's economy. In addition to that, we've definitely taken a very strong stance against Putin, against, his invasion of the Ukraine. And then the other thing that we've done, is Canada has offered to speed up the application process for visas for those wishing to flee from the Ukraine and come to Canada. So those are all really good efforts in order to support the Ukrainian people. I should also mention that, as of March 3rd as well, 35% tariffs were applied to Russia and Belarus products that are coming into the nation of Canada. And so that's also a step in the right direction. When we look at, other actions to counter Russia and Belarus, there are definitely sanctions that have been applied. We've prohibited Russian-owned aircraft and ships from entering Canada's airspace and waterways. We've imposed restrictions of various kinds. We've, and we've closed our office in Russia as well. That said, I do think that there are still a few things that can be done. So, for example, giving visa-free access to come to Canada. People shouldn't have to wait for several weeks in order to be able to come. That should be granted to them, more quickly. I mean, we're talking about a war effort that is the greatest we've seen since World War II. And so Canada does have a responsibility to act and to provide assistance to these folks who are looking for safety.
Yeah, it's such a dire situation that these people are in. Absolutely. Has Canada changed its view on fossil fuels? I know some say that it would be very helpful to Ukraine and the EU if Canada were to do that and to allow for greater exports of liquid natural gas across the Atlantic to make it harder for Putin to fund his war. So incidentally, this would also be a big help to the Canadian economy. What are your thoughts on that?
Mm-hmm. I appreciate the question because I think it's a really important one that needs to be asked. And it's actually also in alignment with a motion that we moved in the House of Commons on Thursday. And that motion is actually calling for attention to be given with regard to the interaction that takes place between energy security and national security, because the two are very, very much tied together. So, let me explain further. Putin is able to invade Ukraine because his war machine is largely propped up by the funds received from the sale of oil and gas. If Eastern Europe doesn't have to be reliant on Russia, if they can be reliant on Canada instead for the natural gas consumption, we can actually take that money from the coffers of Russia then. In doing so, we create greater stability in the region because, of course, those Eastern European nations are no longer dependent, on the bullying, the bully in the neighborhood, I should say. And so I think we do have a great opportunity there then to develop our natural gas to make sure that we're able to get it to the Atlantic Ocean and across, and able to support Eastern Europe in this regard. In doing so, we certainly would be able to play a key role in creating greater stability within the region.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like Canada is trying to take the steps to do the right thing and do a lot. Is there anything our viewers can do to lobby our federal government to increase aid to Ukraine?
Yeah, for sure. I would encourage all Canadians, to write to the Minister of Natural Resources, to write to the Prime Minister, to write to the Deputy Prime Minister, advocate for, greater development of our industry, specifically natural gas. If we can get that pipeline in, for going from west to eastern Canada, we really can play a very key role in helping Eastern Europe and again take away that dependency on Russia, which would allow them to exist in greater peace and stability. I think as well, other actions that Canadians can take is the Red Cross has offered to match all donations up to $10 million. And so I certainly would encourage Canadians to participate in that also.
Okay, great. Thanks for that, Rachel. Let's switch gears a little bit here now and talk about mandates, restrictions, and whatnot. So where are we at now as a nation, now that Alberta and other provinces, as well as many other nations, are beginning to lift COVID restrictions? Should the federal government be doing the same thing? What do you think about that?
Yeah, for sure. I think Canadians feel both a sense of relief and frustration. So you have provinces such as Alberta, our province, where restrictions are largely being lifted, and people are feeling a sense of relief from that. They're enjoying their newfound freedom. Um, and I think they're looking forward to the future with anticipation and expectation. And of course, that goes for businesses and individuals alike. And so that is very positive. At the same time, I think Canadians are seeing the contrast between the freedom that is taking place in Alberta right now, or being granted in Alberta, versus, what the Prime Minister's response it has been and continues to be. And so, we're watching as the Prime Minister continues to buckle down and insist on his punitive measures. For example, on January 15th, he put measures in place that prevented essential service workers from being able to leave Canada and then re-enter Canada without proof of vaccine. And of course, this has largely impacted truck drivers. It is not based in health science. It is simply punitive in nature. And I think it's sending, a message to Canadians that really this Prime Minister is out of step with the advice being given by public health experts. And it causes Canadians to ask the question, well, why? What is his motivation? Why is he failing to act prime ministerial and to really listen to what the experts are saying? And ultimately, grant freedom back to Canadians.
With that in mind, Rachel, how much of a health threat do you think there is if the U.S.-Canada border were to be opened to the unvaccinated?
Again, it's not my opinion that matters in this case. It's what the health experts are saying, and there just really is no scientific data that would suggest, the reopening of our borders would cause any significant threat. And so, based on that information, based on that science, I would say, let's open them back up. Let's get things moving. Again, I would draw people's attention to the fact that our Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms does guarantee the ability to be mobile, to move between provinces, but also to move across our international border into our neighboring country should they allow us to do so. So let's get going.
Yeah, exactly. And what about the fallout from the Emergencies Act imposed by the Trudeau government? Many Canadians and indeed many other nations saw this as a significant government overreach. Should there be some kind of a better explanation from the government or some kind of consequence for taking freedoms away from Canadians, not to mention freezing bank accounts in some cases?
Again, a really great question. And certainly, I think you're asking a number of the questions that Canadians are also asking. So when it comes to the Emergencies Act, really what we have to wonder is, was the threshold met in terms of whether or not it was reasonable or right for the Prime Minister to enact the Emergencies Act? Ultimately, the threshold is that the Prime Minister should have no other tool at his disposal or current law at his reach that would help deal with, the crisis at hand. Well, in this case, the Emergencies Act was invoked after we saw the border crossing in Windsor cleared, after we saw the border crossing in Manitoba cleared, after we saw the border crossing at Coutts in Alberta cleared, after we saw the border crossing in Surrey cleared. So all four of these borders were able to be cleared out, and the protests were resolved peacefully without the invocation of the Emergencies Act. So for the Prime Minister then to claim that he needed the Emergencies Act in order to bring, order back to Ottawa is just absolute ludicrous. It is incredibly disingenuine, in my opinion, because ultimately, at the end of the day, we see that the tools that the Prime Minister needed or that the police needed in order to act, they already existed. The Emergencies Act was simply an overreach of power. It was a flex that the Prime Minister got to engage in order to try to salvage his own image. It was wrong. It was very, very wrong, I believe. Further to that, what we saw is on Monday, the Emergencies Act was passed in the House of Commons because the Liberals and the NDP teamed up on that. But then by Wednesday, the Prime Minister was making an announcement that he was actually going to be revoking the Emergencies Act. It was no longer in effect. What changed from Monday to Wednesday? Well, I can tell you this. Nothing in the downtown core of Ottawa changed within that 48-hour period of time. The only thing that changed was public opinion. And so I applaud Canadians for standing up and for speaking out, for making their voices heard, because ultimately I do believe that they applied enough pressure that the Prime Minister saw he was going to be made a fool of if he continued down that road. Again, I would draw people's attention to the fact that nothing changed in those 48 hours, which again should tell us that Emergencies Act really wasn't needed. The only emergency there was one that Trudeau created for himself. He needed to save his image.
Wow, unprecedented times, absolutely. These are. Rachel, let's switch gears once again. Your own party is going through some transition currently. Any thoughts on the CPC leadership race? Some see it as boiling down to a race between true blue conservatives like Pierre Poilievre and red Tories like maybe perhaps Jean Charest or Peter MacKay. What's happening there?
Sure. I guess I would maybe lead out by saying this, and that is my opinion on the matter is this. I think for a long time we've talked about, the reform conservative, the social conservative, the red Tory, the blue Tory, etc. We have these terms that we like to use to describe variations within conservatism. My hope is that in this race we actually abandon that practice. A conservative is a conservative is a conservative. And one of the things that we pride ourselves in as conservatives is the ability to span the right side of the political spectrum and hold, a variety of viewpoints within that framework. So really, I'm looking for those who are, leadership hopefuls to be able to clearly define the essential principles of conservatism versus the peripherals. And they're going to have to really do some soul searching and I think through what those critical items are in terms of our principles as a party. And then they're going to need a plan that they put in place in terms of how to adhere to those principles. Not only that, but also how do you then communicate those things to the public in a way where, we can attract the swing voter in order to, of course, win their vote in the next election. So I really think it comes down to a few things. Obviously, a vision that captivates Canadians. It comes down to, being able to unify this country, East, West, Indigenous, non-Indigenous, French, English. We really need someone who will be able to bring unity. We need to take a stand for freedom. And again, very clearly define what we mean by that. We need to stand for a strong economy and for its rebuilding effort going forward. And we need to also have a concrete plan in place in terms of our position on the world stage and how we're going to advance Canada within that global context.
All right. Well, it looks like we are about out of time here, but thanks so much for being with us today, Rachel. Really appreciate it.
Yes, absolutely. It's my pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
Rachel Thomas is the MP for Lethbridge and area. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.